Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel, and today I am joined by a new face to this channel, Joe Richards. And today we're here to talk about Metaphor, ReFantazio, the new game from Studio Zero from Atlus. This is the next Persona, guys, and we're here to really just break down everything. I mean, this is a spoiler-full review, a discussion breaking down all the nerdy nonsense about this game. We've both put a lot of time into it. We're both really excited to talk about all the characters and the ending and things. So we both like it, by the way. If you're watching this and you haven't played it, go buy it, go play it, and come back. Save this in your bookmarks on the top of your Google Chrome. But Joe, thank you very much for joining me because no one else I know has finished this game because it's long and you reviewed this game. You put all the time into it. Just let it all out. This is time. It's time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been waiting to do this. I wrote, first of all, like to introduce myself.
Yes.
I'm Joe Richards. I'm a freelance game reviewer and journalist. I write for PlayStation Universe, Super Jump Magazine, and Screensphere. And as Tucker said, I had the privilege of reviewing Metaphor ReFantazio earlier this month, and that was an experience. It was very long, and my review that you can go and read had to avoid a lot of spoilers, as you would imagine. Metaphor is a very story-heavy game, but to cut a very long story short, it is my game of the year 2024, and it is one of the most impressive games in terms of story that I've ever played. There's so many details to get into and so many moving parts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to like summarize my thoughts on this game, but it's very good, I would say.
Yeah, very good, very good. I mean, it's my number 2 game of the year, but it's still a 10 out of 10 for me. I mean, I just love this game. I really sunk into it, and I think the way that I will start is by, I guess, being surprised a little bit about how much I love this game because number one, I'm not really largely into especially turn-based JRPGs. There are a few RPGs the last few years that I've gotten into and really enjoyed, so I'm certainly like getting my sea legs in that genre, and especially with these longer games. But fantasy is not really something I gear towards mostly, and turn-based isn't something I gear towards mostly. And also, I played and beat Persona 5, not Royal, but Persona 5 years ago, and I thought it was good, but I thought it was a little bit too long. But then I played Benefor, and I just loved this game, and I just played as much of as I could, and we'll talk about like it coming at a sort of a weird point in my life, but I'm shocked by how much I love this, and it's one of those games where I think about almost every aspect of it. I'm like, yeah, that's one of the like most impressive feats of scoring and art direction and narrative and voice acting and all this stuff, side content that I've ever seen. And I would be shocked if it doesn't win like a lot of different awards in the award season this year. I think it's coming at the perfect time with like one of the highest Metacritic scores of the year. So I think this game will get its flowers. And that's really satisfying to me because I love this game a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's really interesting. It's a really interesting perspective, actually, because I think we've got like two very unique perspectives here where you're not necessarily the most well-versed in long JRPGs. Just last month, I reviewed like 4 of them.
Yeah.
So I've got a little bit of a sort of bias towards this genre. And I think there's a lot of, I mean, especially coming from your perspective, that this game left such an impact. And you don't even have that sort of Atlus sort of those memories.
Yes, I've had some Atlus memories. Here's my Atlus experience. I said I beat Persona 5. I finished that game. That's certainly like the biggest one of their games I've played. That is their biggest game from Atlus, I would say. But I also beat Catherine Full Body earlier this year. I really liked that game, which actually Catherine Full Body, technically the first game from Studio Zero, the expanded remake of Catherine. And also back in the day, I played Trauma Center New Blood on Wii. So I've got some Atlus connections, but
of course you're American. You actually got Trauma Team over there. We didn't get Trauma Team.
Team's a different game.
Yeah, it was made by Atlus though.
Yeah. Oh wait, so was it released in the UK? Really?
No. It was one of those weird ones where they just released it in the US, as far as I remember.
Okay, I'll have to look into that. But yeah, I have some experience with Atlus. Is what I'm saying. Not completely into it, but I'm definitely not the guy that has played. I haven't touched an SMT game. I haven't played any of Persona 3 or 4, and so my RPG experience with Atlus is Persona 5 into this, which I think that this is easily the strongest of the games that I've played because I think it feels the most cohesive and has the least amount of I think there's a lot of bloat in Persona 5, and there's just some other like stranger story elements and different things in the other games I've played that this game just seems to kind of polish a lot of that away.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. That was one of the main things that sort of stuck out to me as someone who has experience with Atlus's other
Hmm.
games, is that, you know, they always have this sort of very socially aware kind of
Yeah.
thing. I think Persona especially has always been this very urban and very modern franchise and the
Yeah.
things that it talks about. And, you know, for what it does well, there's always like just one bit where
Hmm.
it's like, guys,
Hmm.
I, not in a mean way, but they sort of miss the mark a
Sure.
little bit with metaphor and the things that it deals with, as I'm sure we'll talk
Yeah.
about. It doesn't have a mark that's missed. It doesn't
Hmm.
have a moment where I'm like, maybe rein it in. No, it completely hits the mark on everything that it sets out to
Yeah.
do. And for an Atlus game, that was really surprising because I kept on expecting like, oh god, this character's going to be like accidentally like it the
Yeah.
worst.
Yeah.
I'm going to be stuck with them for the whole game. No, no, everything felt like they really took their time with it and they were polishing
Mm.
it out, and the results show themselves, I think.
Yeah, I think we should start with the like and deep diving into things. We should just start with the thematics of this game because I think that's really where it sets itself apart from other RPGs. Is it creates this narrative and meta narrative that are so intertwined and so like politically and socially aware that it creates a tone that makes you think about like storytelling, and it makes you think about
Yeah,
culture, and it makes you think about the ways in which people the way that people have told stories has evolved over time. And for me, the most impressive pieces of art, whether that is a film or a game, which are the two mediums that I'm most passionate about, the most impressive pieces of art for me are the ones that make me think about art. And I really do think
yeah,
that metaphor, in the way that it plays into and also subverts JRPG conventions and fantasy conventions, especially on the storytelling side, that all that thematic stuff is so rich here. And I really want to, that's honestly from in my mind, like that's mostly what I talk about here. It's just like how many
yeah,
different layers there are to this.
yeah. No, I mean, there's like a ton of moving parts. I mean, even if it, like just looking at the broad strokes, right? You talk about thinking about fiction and how the way that it interacts with our world,
Hmm.
the whole like, I mean, more as a character, jumping straight
Yeah,
in, more as a character is obviously a comparison point to the real world author Thomas More and Utopia,
sure.
which is a representation of the fantasy novel in the game.
Hmm.
That was the moment where I sort of realized that metaphor was going to be something special,
Yeah.
because I studied Utopia for about a year at
Oh,
university,
interesting. Okay.
and I had that sort of already knowledge.
Yeah.
So like hearing that this game was like going to be all about that sort of dynamic, I was like, oh my god, this is going to be my game of the year,
Hmm.
and then it was. But more as a character and the whole theme of like fantasy reflecting reality, it plays in the game itself. That, you know, there's like this conversation about like, oh, you know, what's the real world and what's the fantasy world, and what can we do
Hmm.
in our real world, and is fantasy even good?
Yeah.
And then it really just throws it back on its audience, where it's like, oh, hey guys, this is reflecting your
Yes,
world. It's
exactly.
like a really cool double layer to it. And I feel like the game, where I thought it was going to be quite, because in the marketing they were talking about like, oh, you know, this fantasy reflects reality, and I thought, okay, this is going to be an excuse for them to talk about, you know, discrimination
Yeah.
and
Which they
stuff
do.
like that. Yeah, they do, absolutely. But it felt like it was way better realized than I
Hmm.
thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised by the directions that they took with it. And even in those issues, like I'm sure we'll get into it, the discrimination and stuff like that, it felt very well done. And I saw some concerns because I'm not sure if you were paying attention to the game when the demo came out,
Hmm.
but people were sort of looking at it and saying like, "Oh, this feels very heavy-handed. It
Yeah.
feels like
Yeah.
they're trying to baby people through it." And I'm like, well, yeah, in the first few hours, you do have this sort of, it's a new world, it's a new IP.
Yeah.
They spend time dedicated to building this world and talking about the layers and layers of conflict, just on a surface level, and then from there they get really into the nitty gritty
Yeah.
details, and that was something that was really interesting to me, especially looking at like the villains that you fight,
Hmm.
which I'm sure we'll go through like about three or four of
Hmm.
them.
Yeah. Well, you.
Which one was your favorite?
I quickly want to mention because you talk about layers with this game and how it has these narratives and themes and meta narratives that all tied together. But for me, it's a game that I feel peels away its own layers at just the right time to where it feels like a very honest depiction of like the creative process. Like I can feel as they are talking about this is a story, and you as a player, you type in your name at the beginning, and your name gets referenced multiple times throughout, and then it is very explicitly saying that this is a parallel in the world of the game. It's a metaphor for the utopia that is
Mm.
our world, is where we see a lot of issues with our world. The fantasy world that we usually see as utopia sees as their utopia, and it feels refreshingly honest and like kind of transparent. Even though there is a lot of moving parts, it doesn't feel the need to obscure its themes. Like the themes of politics and voting that are really interesting. It coming out in this year, the themes of racism and of discrimination are just very clear. They don't feel like we need to like sugarcoat this. This is a heart on its sleeve kind of game, and that is actually kind of an interesting parallel. This game just parallels itself in so many interesting ways to the fact that the characters like rip out their own heart and then express their feelings.
Yeah.
That it feels like raw and like unfiltered. Like, no, guys, we need to talk about this. This is interesting. This is deep. This is important. And we don't necessarily need to obscure what we're talking about in order for it to hit home. And as you connect more to the characters and learn more about the world and the lore, it starts filling in and then supports those themes even greater. It definitely comes full circle, which I think is really, really nice. But villains, give me the list of who you would consider the set of villains of this game, and we can choose one.
So yeah, no. So I suppose like, at the top we got
Yeah.
Luis. That's like the big one. I think we could include Zorba as
Oh,
his
sure.
own
Yeah.
separate
Mm-hmm.
thing. There's Joanna.
Oh, true.
She's one of my favorites. And then I suppose we can kind of just have a little whistle stop tour around some of the other candidates because there is one
Sure.
I want to talk about.
Yeah.
It's quite funny. My favorite one was the old guy that wants to tax the young. Do you remember him?
So the the candidates are interesting because I think at the beginning of the game I felt like they were going to play more strongly into the narrative than they end up.
Yeah.
Like you really like as the tournament is being set up and all the different candidates are lined up, and you have this number that's ticking down at the top of like how famous you are in comparison to all the people you're competing against. I was like, oh, each of the chapters is going to be me sort of diving into the political themes of each of these people and how I'm going to fight against them. And I honestly don't think that there are any candidates that aren't like main story elements. Like there's the monk guy who's technically a candidate, but honestly at some certain points doesn't really feel like one. And
Yeah.
technically, the Santa Fe Forden is technically a candidate, and Luis is a candidate, and so there are these like bigger ones that are candidates, but there's like a dozen at least other candidates that you see, and they all have funny designs. And there's like this blue Parapus guy that I was like, oh, okay, he's got a really cool design. I'm sure I'm gonna interact with him more. And there's this like smaller orange Ujif character, and I'm like, oh, great! I can't wait to like have the point in the story where
Yeah.
I hit them and then get to know like what their political themes are. But the only chance to do that is in the debates because most of them don't really show up almost anywhere else in the game. And so I'm not saying this is necessarily a critique of it, but why I can't necessarily pick a candidate that I cared particularly about thematically
Yeah.
is because I do think they are given slightly the short end of the stick in terms of they fill out this ensemble in a way that I appreciate, but I never got into any of them. And also the debates are so quick. There's like one question
Yeah.
and they talk about one point that I never felt like I really understood like any of the one candidates in particular.
Yeah, I think that the candidates are really interesting to me actually because this is something that I talked about in my review, where I mentioned how the game does a very good job across all of its villains of very much spending time to help you understand what their perspective
Yeah,
is, and that's something I really appreciated. And it
totally.
also doesn't waste time on justifying stupid politics
Sure.
either, like the candidate who wants to give free alcohol to everybody. It's
That's
like
the
we don't
Parapus
spend
guy that I
time
was
with
talking about. Yeah,
Loveless.
yeah.
Yeah,
Loveless, yeah.
Loveless. We don't spend time with Loveless because, like, why would we justify that? It's a stupid idea.
Mhm.
And the same for the I can't remember his name now, but the old guy, like the old guy that I find so funny. They don't spend time. They don't even give him a character portrait.
Oh,
Um,
really?
no, they don't. He attacks you, and he's like, "Oh,
Oh,
like
that's
respect your
right, that
elders."
guy. Yeah. He attacks
And
you
it's like,
on the
yeah,
ship. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like I'm not justifying that. The game is not justifying this,
Yeah.
but for the cast that it does care about, it spends time really developing them. That's why outside of Luis and the whole conflict with that, Joanna
Mhm.
is actually my favorite villain
Sure.
in the game because she like the whole arc with her sort of it that was when the themes really set in for me, where you find out that her baby was killed because of it being mixed
Yeah.
race
Yeah.
and her sort of complete fallout after that and like how that interacted with the humans.
Hmm.
I thought this is such a dark
Yeah.
twist
Hmm.
for an Atlus game, and it was executed so well. And for how despicable it was and how terrible it was that happened,
Hmm.
I felt like they spent time letting them
Yeah.
grieve, and it never felt like if we're comparing it to other Atlus
Yeah.
games like Persona 5, where all the villains in that game were inherently
Yeah.
caricatures
They're
of
cartoonish.
themselves.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, which is the point.
And then, but also
But
their goals are cartoonish. Like they want ridiculous things. They've done incredibly terrible things. And I think part of the reason why for Persona 5,
sorry,
that game's villains never appealed to me. I don't think I could name a specific one. Is because even though each chapter is technically about like the bad things they've done and like changing their heart, they never felt grounded. Those games are much more about, that game in particular, because I haven't played the other Persona games, are much more about like presenting the bad thing and then like taking it down. But I think that especially with Joanna, the way that she gets a redemption arc, I think is really, really smart and really deftly done.
yeah,
And especially because her the issues, the pain, the trauma that she has endured that causes her to lash back out at the world in this way and do the terrible things that she does, are tied into the social themes of this game, which I think,
yeah,
on the whole, almost every character ties into in an interesting way. I think there are some that if I like read through more of their lines, I'd remember how they connected to it more. But I definitely think Joanna's the strongest one of that, because like each section of the game where you're visiting a new major city, has some sort of character that's like the main antagonist. You're going into the dungeon and they're the final boss. But Joanna is definitely the one that hit the strongest to me because she does get that character arc. I mean, also, I don't know if this is a stretch, but Rella near the end kind of becomes
yeah,
a villain. And I think that her redemption arc and her characterization and the way that her history impacts like three different party members and then impacts the
yeah,
country as a whole, I think that was really smartly done. But that's something that this game does really well, is even presenting, up to the very end with Luis, complex characters and people that aren't
yeah,
black and white bad. They have these goals and they see the world in a misguided way, but they, for the most part, have these goals that are in parallel to the ones of our protagonists and to us as the player. And so, no, very few elements of the game feel like they're caricatures, even though this game is very based on archetypes. I mean, literally, but also like
yeah,
character archetypes and classes and things. It manages to put a solid enough, like grounded spin on all of this, to where while you're learning about all these different races and you're learning about all these different archetypes and things, it all still feels thematically interesting and not like, oh, that's just like the dumb one that they put in.
yeah. No, I think that's like such an important thing to say about the cast in Metaphor, from the villains to the main
Hmm.
party and everybody in between. Is that everybody feels really like developed,
Hmm.
like you said, you do play on these archetypes, and you do play on these sort of like, oh, the gruff older guy who's been through it.
Yeah.
But even with Heisme,
Hmm.
I felt like the the things that he went through in his bond was so like it was so well
Oh,
done. It was so
totally.
nuanced, and everything felt really well, like just said, well written.
Hmm.
Same for Stroll. I was really worried about Stroll
Hmm.
actually in the early game because he sort of fulfills that early game like buddy character
Yeah.
that Ryuji does in Persona
Yes,
5
definitely.
and that
They even
Yosuke
sit
does
the
in Persona
same way,
4.
which I thought was funny. Like I saw the animation that Stroll does when he like puts his arms on his legs. I'm like, they I know where you got that
That's
animation
Ryuji.
from.
That's Ryuji.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, they did him
Oh,
justice.
absolutely.
They did everybody justice. And the thing is like every character has their ups and downs. I think everybody has flaws and everybody has motivations that even if it doesn't redeem them, I think makes them understandable and it makes me sympathize with them
Sure.
because ultimately they are the victim of bigger systems.
Mm-hmm.
Like Rella, I think when you mentioned her was one that stuck in my
Totally.
mind that she was ultimately actually the main like she was the person you were after the
Yeah.
entire
Yeah.
game. You didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
But then when it's revealed, it's like, yeah, she did what she did, but at the same time she was a kid and it
Yeah.
was Forden who did that, who forced her to do it at risk of killing Juno.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's such an interesting interplay between all of the main cast here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And again, this is something that I mentioned where Persona 5 has this problem where where Haru turns
Mm-hmm.
up at the 11th hour and just kind of she exists as an excuse for Morgana to get back into the party,
Mm.
and then she doesn't do anything really for the rest of the game. Whereas the last party member in this game, Basilia,
Yeah.
he has been with you for a while, and he has a very defined sort of position in the party
Mm-hmm.
before he even becomes playable.
Yep.
And then I felt like by the time I'd maxed out his bond relatively late in the game, even then I felt like, oh, he's a part of the
Yeah.
team. He doesn't feel like that guy that appeared at the end of the game. It
Totally.
was like, no, he deserves to be there,
Yeah.
and that's generally what I felt for everybody. And there also wasn't the reverse problem
Mm.
of a character at the start of the game being really important and then just dropping off and
Yeah.
not being relevant
Mm.
again. Where I was worried that Stroll, after the I can't remember the captain name.
Mm-hmm.
What was his name?
Oh, the guy that
Uh,
that's like running the troop that you're a part of at the beginning. Yeah, I don't know
yeah,
his
and
name.
he
Yeah.
gets eaten.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, Stroll's just going to kind of go away
Yeah.
now. He's going to sit in the background and then he'll appear at the end of the game. But no, he was constant. He was a consistent
Yeah.
character, and I loved how every single person played off each other.
Yeah.
And like it was just great. I absolutely love the main
Yeah.
cast. I think the main cast are phenomenal.
I think that's the second strongest part of this game. I think the themes and the way that it plays with narratives and meta narratives and all that, as I mentioned up top, is the strongest and most unique element of this game. But I think what endeared me the most to it and allowed me to attach to those themes was the fact that there is no weak link in this main cast. They're all paced out very nicely. We don't get that 11th hour party member that really feels out of place. And I think that it's paced in an interesting way where all the characters sort of join at different times for different reasons. And I like that this is it's an oddball cast,
Yeah,
and nothing about it feels like regimented. I think the only thing that about the cast that to me feels like structured is that explicitly each one of the cast members is of a different race, or what's the word? They have the 8 tribes, I guess they're called. Yeah,
tribes. Yeah,
they're of a different tribe, and but that ultimately doesn't really matter, especially because you have so many um, characters secondary to the main 9 uh, character cast that are so close to the cast that they end up like filling it out in an interesting way. But uh, this game does something really really interesting with like each of the ways that each of the characters are introduced. You start the game and you have 2 party members already technically because Gallica is from you with you from the very very beginning, and you don't learn
mm,
about why she joined alongside your protagonist, who we'll be calling Will for this review. Who we don't know why she joined Will until until like
like
10 hours before the end of the game, and
yeah,
which is very far into the game. And then the way that Stroll joins, he feels, I think, to your point, the most like, oh, we got to do this. We got to have the buddy. This is definitely leaning into the archetype of having like that pal alongside you from the very beginning. But I also like how Stroll, in terms of his character arc and pace, sticks around in interesting ways you were mentioning, where he's actually the one that ends up taking charge in a lot of sequences. I mean, he's not just
mm,
the the buddy that has this tragic past that you learn about. But whenever there's like a confrontation with a villain across the whole course of the game, Stroll steps out from the party and he chews out the villain and he presents his case.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa. Like some of the other characters do that because usually they have like a bond or a relationship past history with whoever you're talking to. But Stroll largely doesn't. But he's just a very convicted person. Like he has a strong conviction and he's very confident. And watching him, even in like the final fight with Luis, like step out in front and be like, no, this is bad. You are doing this for this reason. And like, this is why the world needs to change. And I'm like, damn, Stroll, like you're keeping
He's
the fight.
the protagonist.
Well,
Yeah.
kind of. I mean, honestly, I kind of felt
Yeah.
that at times. And then Hulkenberg and Heisme, and then especially like the ways that Juna is introduced like early on, and then she comes back in parts of the party, and Basilio especially, and then even in the middle there, Yufa joins like immediately, and so that makes her feel sort of different from the rest of the cast. And
Yeah.
I just like the fact that no character feels like they are you're just like hitting that story beat. They're very naturally integrated in. Everything is set up about why their heart is changed to be able to team up with you, what their history was before that, and then you get even more texture as, especially with the bonds, but also just with the rest of the narrative, what you learn about the other ways that they connect to the world around them. And so the party is just, I mean, like this is a triple S tier JRPG party.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we didn't even get to talk about my favorite Neurus.
Oh yeah,
shout out to my boy Neurus.
Well, Neurus is great, and Neurus and Gallica are party members. Absolutely, they're there the entire time,
Yeah.
but they're not playable party members. They serve this alternate role, but they're still always there. And so, I just like it. I just think it's really clever and a really interesting way to balance things.
It is a really good way of using the sort of navigation. I mean, I felt Gallica was, as far as the navigator character goes for Atlus games, because they always have one, where like, in Persona 5 it starts off as Morgana and then you get Futaba. With Gallica, it was quite refreshing to have this character that was just like, I'm your navigator and I will be for the whole game and this is what I do. She was very helpful. She never had a moment of it never felt like there was any sort of sabotage. There was never any getting in my way.
Well, she never
Gallica was lovely.
She never has like, she's never like convinced to join the bad side or something. And the thing I like so much about her is that even though she's not a playable character, she feels like a part of the group. She's always talking to everyone, and she also has her own struggles. And she talks about the fact that she doesn't know why she's here because she can't fight. And that gives her like this really interesting texture of like, no, you've been here since the beginning. Like you're pretty damn helpful. And it's her abilities that let you see what level the enemies are. And technically it's her abilities that let you hear the music and her abilities that let you see what the weaknesses of the enemies are. And so I like that they contextualize that around the fact that she's the part of the team. And even in your inventory, she has like her gear. Like she has a little fairy dagger. And I'm like, it's just so thoughtful. Like, even though she's not a playable party member in the traditional sense, she is a member of the family. She's a member of this cast.
Yeah.
And even if she's like, quote unquote, just like the Fi or the Navi or whatever, like she's kind of just like the guide character. The fact that especially she has like a character arc and she has like really late game twists to like why she's there and everything made her feel like the best realized version of one of those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was going to mention the fact that you can like, it's completely like superfluous detail. You can't even really do anything but being able to go into the equipment screen and see like, oh, Gallica's equipment. She has a little dagger and she has like a little accessory. It's like, it's such a nice detail and it really speaks to sort of that layer of detail. And I mean, you just said it, like that sort of contextualization of those sort of game mechanics where like, it is Gallica who can let us see the enemy's weakness. It is Gallica who makes the music play, which with that in mind, like occasionally I'm like, this dude has like, Will has like the coolest imagination of all time to be imagining these bangers constantly. It's crazy. No, I absolutely love how, I mean, it comes back to that layeredness again. That sort of conversation about like every single small thing has been thought of and planned out and like mind mapped. And I imagine there's like some horrific diagram over at Atlus where it's like this links to this, links to this, links to that. And it's that dedication is incredible. And like it again, just speaks to the quality of this game and the story it's trying to tell. Even like just beyond like the minute to minute, like beat to beat narrative.
Mhm.
I think it's great.
Yeah, talk a little bit why you love Nurse so much, because he's certainly the least typical of the party members.
I just love him. He's like if I had to draw a comparison, he's like Sid
Yeah. Oh, totally.
from
Yeah.
like Final Fight. He's the Sid of this game,
Hmm.
and but compared to Sid, like because I've seen people compare this cast to like the Legend of Final Fantasy VII, and
Mm.
I'm like, Eurus is way better than Sid.
Yeah.
He's such a friendly old guy. He's eccentric. He's funny. I guess this sort of gets into the bonds and
Hmm.
stuff, but he has such, despite his sort of eccentricities, he's very down to earth, and he has like this very pragmatic look at technology,
Mm.
which I think is something that's gone overlooked actually
Mm.
when people have talked about this game, where people have like you know the game talks about discrimination and stuff, but he talks about technology and how sometimes it is best to just halt development.
Mm.
Where at the end of his bond, he talks about okay, because his entire bond is like finding the relics across the
Yeah.
world, and he ends up putting them together, and he's like, oh, this is a weapon of mass destruction. We have a duty of care to destroy this weapon. I know we've looked for it, but we need to destroy it. And that's such a refreshing
Mm.
thing
Yeah.
to see in a game like this,
In
where
most
so many
games,
things
you
would be
would
like,
complete that, and then you get the cool ass weapon, and then you'd
you
be able to
get the
do like the BFG Doom move at the end, like blow the guy up. You'd be like, yeah.
yeah,
But you're right,
but
refreshing.
Neurus
Yeah.
is like, no, we can't do. Neurus is like, no, we can't do that because all well and good, we can use it to defeat Luis, but then what?
Hmm.
We need to sort of think about the future, and I don't think we need to worry about
Sure.
that. And that was really good to me. And that, for as funny as I find Neuros, I think
Hmm.
his voice acting is incredible. I think everybody's voice
Yeah.
acting is incredible. Um, he's such a resonant character, and I think at the moment, I think we see like technology in the real world is like going at a scary
Mm.
pace, and it is maybe not in the same way being dangerous, but it is a risk factor. To see a game just say, yeah, you know what, no, don't do that,
Yeah.
is good, and it wasn't where I was expecting to see it either.
Mm.
I was expecting to like I think like you said, get like this uber powerful weapon for finishing this quest line,
Yeah.
and at the end it's like, hey guys, sometimes it's okay to not get the mega powerful weapon.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I suppose that opens the conversation for like what were like the bonds out of like the big list
Hmm.
that you have. Which ones are sort of your picks,
Um, I think.
if you can?
Yeah. No, I think Maria is one of my favorites. I think that she is one of the characters I was mentioning earlier that is not a playable character. She never joins the party, but she's so present throughout the game that it gives this game a real strong sense of heart. I think almost all the characters end up gaining that sense of heart, and some of them have it from the beginning. Like Basilio's always got a guy with heart from the first time you meet him, but Maria.
I love
Yeah,
Basilio.
well, and we'll certainly talk about it. I think I actually kind of do want to like
Yeah,
go through each of the party members and like why they're interesting, and then we can split that off into other things. But Maria almost ends up feeling like a party member because she's a extension of Alcis or Grius, I guess. Like they're
yeah,
both his name, but of Grius because she's his daughter. And then the narrative that her bond tells that is about her and the Honeybee Inn and Fabienne and the sort of slum culture in Grand Trad and the fact that she is a mixed race character, being part Rug and part Ishika. She's right. I'm
Ishka.
trying to get all
Yeah,
the names right. But that plays into her narrative in interesting ways. And she also is someone that you return to a lot through the game. And the Hanami Inn is used as a base multiple times throughout the game. And I think that she to me felt the most core to the cast of the secondary characters because there are some other ones that I thought were solid but didn't really fall in love with. Primarily for me, Barden was the one I cared the least about.
yeah,
Um, I like that he set up earlier in the Joanna narrative, and the sort of like voting narrative with him is kind of interesting, but Maria was like for me was the strongest outside of the main cast. I would still want to get to, but
yeah.
were there any secondary characters that jumped out to you?
Yeah, no, I mean, Barton was an interesting one for me that you mentioned him because I think he's as close as you get to like this kind of not great
Yeah.
character where like he does have these, because other characters do go through struggles, and like I could talk about any of the main party members, but Barden's is very much like a problem of his own making
Hmm.
that you kind of just see him make, and then he takes the initiative and fixes it. But I thought that was a really interesting arc. It took me a while to appreciate it,
Sure.
because I think I was in the same boat as you, where I thought I'm not really digging him. I think he's a little bit
He's
of
also
a
got the most boring design, I think.
yeah,
Doesn't help.
yeah. He, I think he has less distinguishing him, I think, than the others. But yeah, I appreciated Barden. Other characters I enjoyed. I loved Alfonso.
Hmm. Alonzo.
He was probably Alonso. I don't know
Yeah.
why I thought Alfonso. Alonso. He, I think, is probably my pick for
Hmm.
favorite, just because of how surprising I found his. See, the more that I speak about this, the more I think about. Oh, what about Brigitte?
Yeah, yeah.
What about? But Alonso, I think, was my pick, just because of how shocking it was when I
Yeah.
thought, "Oh my god, they're killing a social link.
Hmm.
They're killing
Yeah.
him."
Again, it's a subversion that
That
this game does. A lot of people look at Metaphor and be like, "Oh, well, they're just doing Persona again." You have the bonds, you have
no,
the weakness system, you have the time and the months and the days and all of these things, and the dungeons are similarly structured. But I do think that it is a interesting critical look at where subversions can be done within a similar structure, because it is a similar game in many ways, and it feels like the follow up in many ways, but it is one of those moments where you progress a Neurus's bond in a different way than everyone else. I'm like, oh,
yeah,
that's interesting. That makes him feel interesting, and it feel like the team thought a lot about how can we make sure there is variety even within something that's familiar. And Alonzo dying, and then you can't go back to him and talk to him. Like, you go back and talk to everyone else by the end of the game. You can't
yeah.
go back and talk to him because he's fucking dead. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Can they
He's
do
just
that?
fun.
They
And then
did.
and then I mean, he does eventually come back, which was like they managed to work that one out, and the plot that they give for it was really good. I
Mhm.
really enjoyed it. And they set up this whole thing where he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna be your like, almost like your spokesperson. Like, I'm gonna be your like chief
Mhm.
speaker when you're king." And I absolutely love that. But for like for the few, like for the 20 hours that I thought he was dead, I was like, oh my god. Like, they have actually killed social links before, but it's usually at the end of the quest.
Yeah.
Like, it's usually at the end of it. So when he was talking about like, oh, I'm gonna get executed, I was like, oh, haha, this is gonna be like a this is like, he's a fake, like his entire thing, he's like a faker, he's meant to be like this deceitful guy. And it's like, oh, they just did it.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. I audibly luckily nobody else was in the house, but I audibly went, oh my god,
Mhm.
when they did it. It's the first time that's happened when I'm playing a game. But I absolutely loved him. Who else was there?
Here's an interesting one
There's
that's not a social link, but again, to the point of
mm,
this game having such a compelling cast that you can even step beyond the quote unquote B tier social links and still get to interesting characters that aren't necessarily villains. Batlin, the Sanctus Crier,
Batlin.
is a fascinating character because for a while of the game, you're like, oh, he's just this guy that shows up every once in a while and he's a little bit funny, but he just fills this role. He's like kind of like Gallica on Eurus. He's a character that fills a role that you've seen in other stories before. But the fact that by the end of the game, he's the character that you feel like you've convinced the most, and he's learned to see the ways of your party and the ways of your goals, and is then like working from the inside as someone with a influence and sort of like a place in the quote unquote popular culture of this world. I thought it was fascinating because he's not a Bond, but he's there so
Mm.
much throughout the game and shows up and has an arc and does get to know the characters. And I was like, whoa, like it even extends to that. Like it's just so cool that they really fleshed out things in that way.
Yeah, interesting little tidbit actually. So someone's done some data mining of the PC version. Apparently, he was supposed to have a
Hmm.
Bond, which I'm not surprised to
Yeah,
hear.
yeah, I
But I think
agree.
I think they pivoted. I think they wanted him to be this character who is there throughout, and you get to like. There's no chance of you missing his
Hmm.
transformation into from just this sort of sanctist spokesperson into an actual believer
Yeah.
in your cause. and that was such an interesting transformation because I remember when he's on Virgo Island,
Yeah.
I thought, oh, this dude's
Yeah,
annoying.
yeah, yeah.
I
Like, what are
hate
you
it. I
doing here?
hate Battling. Well, yeah, what are you doing here, you stalker?
Hmm.
And then like I really grew to like him, and he becomes like this almost similar to Juna in a sense, this like ally in the shadows, where he's like, hey, I'm batting for you, ignore what I'm saying publicly.
Yeah.
Even then, like eventually, like towards the end of the game, he's like this, guys, we need to stand up against
Hmm.
Luis. We need to do this. Oh, there's like the really funny scene where he like bets his entire life savings on
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
winning the throne.
Put it on the dime bag, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was that moment where I'm like, you know what, Battling's quite cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, like again, this is like another member of the side cast. It's
yeah.
like someone who I just thought, oh, you know, he's got a portrait. He'll be around, I guess. But then like he actually turned out to be this really amazing character, and again was a really great surprise
Yeah,
in a game already full of phenomenal
yeah,
characters.
yeah. Another one, Fidelio. Fidelio is an
Oh,
amazing
Fidelia.
character because he is another example of what this game I think follows up on Persona 5 with, and maybe the other Persona games, I'm not familiar with them, but the idea of like changing someone's heart, like convincing them, teaching them to help themselves and see the world in a different way. Fidelio absolutely exemplifies that because he's a stubborn character. He's very emotional. He's also very closed off. Like he reacts very quickly, hard headed. But the way that the game like has you brush up against him a couple of times before he and Basilio end up joining you on your trip to Virga Island. I thought was smart because I was like, okay, I know who he is. I know what his personality's like. I know the dynamic between him and Basilio and Luis. Okay, I get that it's established. And then the fact that over the course of the Virga Island or Etria arc, he becomes a character that like gains a little bit of heart, and he's like saying these things, but you can see, like, you can hear it in his voice and see in his eyes and like see it in his relationship with his brother that he's gaining a better sense of the world around him and challenging his own worldviews. And then the fact that he dies and that pushes Basilio to have his character arc even furthered, I thought was just, I mean, I think he has one of the best arcs in the entire game,
Yeah,
and he's a character that is only around for like the middle third of the game. But
yeah, I would agree.
you just fall in love with him.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think Fidelio and Basilio in general are absolutely fascinating. I think out of all the main party members, those will Fidelio and Basilio I count as like a
Sure,
package
yeah,
deal. Um, but I think the way that Fidelio talks about his relationship with Louise and the hope that it gives him. I
mm,
remember early on in the game when they were sort of talking about the how Luis's sort of approach was giving hope to the races
yeah,
like the
hmm,
Parapus about giving them a reason to live. I thought, actually, are we doing the right thing here? Oh, like I there was a really interesting moment where I sat down and I spoke to people about it, and I was like, I don't know if we're doing the right thing
hmm,
here. Like,
yeah,
obviously, like the, that was when the conflict became a lot more grey for me. And I thought it was such an interesting way to do it. And the way that Fidelio talked about his like relationship with Luis
hmm,
and the way that developed and the way that he sort of slowly came around to us
hmm,
and saw that we were also fighting for the same thing. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And also a great opportunity to flesh out what I thought was going to be like, oh, Luis is just an abjectly evil
hmm,
person. I thought like it was fascinating to see like his manipulation in action
yeah,
and see like this is like an actual person who has been impacted by Luis, and you know having that sort of lingering like in terms of that as well, it was like a great sense of threat while we were on the island. I was like, oh, this is kind of awkward for us.
hmm,
Like we're on an island and Luis is kind of there,
yeah,
but he's not. And that was great.
yeah,
But seeing Fidelio just grow up in that last moment in Altabury before he gets
hmm,
killed, and the way that impacts Basilio and his bond after that, I was like, this is like, considering that Fidelio was introduced relatively late, or like in the second third,
yeah,
I was like, damn, they did their work with him
totally,
and they made it like they made it work brilliantly.
Yeah. And to diverge from the cast a little bit, I still want to get back and talk about most of the rest of them, frankly. But I do think that one of the coolest things in terms of narrative structure of this game is that you, as the protagonist, and your team and your party end up working for the villain for like half the game. Like you
Yeah.
are, like your goal is to get alongside him, get in close with him, and then try to learn as much about him so that you can then defeat him. And but what that means is that there's a good chunk of the game where, as far as everyone knows, you're just one of his lackeys and you're working alongside him and you're trying to further his goal. And I've never seen anything like that in a game, frankly.
Mm.
Or honestly, I don't even know. I can't really think of a story where I've seen that before. And I just thought it was so clever and a great way to keep the villain presence feeling both a little bit more gray, as you were saying, because it adds a little bit more texture and like you do get to know Luis a little bit earlier on, but also keeps him more of a constant presence. Because if he had just been this background force, as many JRPG villains are, that are doing things away from you to other people, he would have felt a little bit more cliche. But the fact that you
Mm.
work alongside him and get to know the ways in which all the soldiers working alongside him believe in him, and you like fall into their customs a little bit and you get to learn about the structure and things, gives him by extension a little bit more personality and connects him deeper to the cast, because they not only like learn what he's doing that is worse than they knew, but also they realize that he is doing some good to some people that believe in his cause. And so like it creates a very interesting sort of morally gray conflict that also makes him a stronger JRPG villain, because he has a stronger presence through that narrative structure device.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's probably one of the biggest. Like, you've hit the nail on the head. I think with that, talking about how this sort of really sort of is an interesting dynamic where you have got this villain who, in Persona, like again, calling back to Persona, the villain in that game is largely like ideological. Like, it's ideological. It's more philosophical. It's like, oh, we're fighting against each individual thing,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually there's something that ties it
Yeah.
together. With Metaphor, it was like very much, this is the villain,
Yeah.
here he
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
and this is like your relationship with him, and it develops over the course of the game, which is really refreshing, actually, and it opens up some really interesting dialogues because obviously the game sort of sets out and presents like Forden as the correct
Mm-hmm.
option
Yeah. Yeah.
for the throne, which obviously isn't correct. Um, and working with Louise opens the opportunity to like look into like, hey, like this is what sanctism is
Mm-hmm.
doing, and it opens a lot of doors on that side that wouldn't have been able to be opened otherwise. And I think the entire Etria arc with like, oh, this is like just this is basically baby colonialism where we're like
Mm-hmm.
stealing religious relics from things like that. There was like a lot of conversations in that arc which I thought was really fascinating
Yeah.
because if I remember correctly, it's the Sanctus Church that like sort of sanctions that, where it's like, hey guys, go out and hunt a religious relic
Mm-hmm.
and bring it here
Yeah.
and whoever gets the best one, which is like very I think heavy handed, but I think it opens a lot of interesting doors. And having that sort of that conflict be like, oh, Luis wants you to do it and the church wants you to do it, is like, huh, this is quite an interesting
Yeah.
crossover. And I think again it was sort of that point in the game where the pieces really started falling into place for me, and I started seeing like, okay, Atlus isn't just setting out to say that Luis bad.
Yeah.
They're setting out to say something much bigger about like the overall systems in that world that are corrupt
Yeah.
and the ways that they actually interact with their people, even in like these, what is supposed to be like this tournament for the throne, is being used ostensibly for like, oh, this is for us. We are gaining from this. We are still getting the throne. You've just done a job for us. Which I which on the one hand you could be like, oh, what was the whole point of that? Oh, but then the conversations that we have because of that, and
Mm-hmm.
also the fact that Yufa herself, I think this is why Yufa is going to be a character that I think has a big impact on
Sure.
discussion,
Mm.
because she is, I think, arguably, because there isn't really a sanctist character in the party, really.
No.
By the
Uh, No, I mean, yeah, because like even the closest would be like, I guess, kind of Hulkenberg or Nearest because they were a part, like they were tangential to the royal family,
Yeah,
but like they, yeah, I don't think there's like ever a moment other than Yufa with her Mustari background. The
yeah,
characters, the party members, don't really tie too much into the religious themes of the game, which is
yeah,
interesting. And I think that maybe if there was any anywhere I would want the themes to have been explored a little bit more, I think that uh, the religious element of this game I think is really fascinating, one of the strongest elements of it. But the fact that we don't really know, I mean, there might be hints somewhere, but we don't really know the religious affiliations or histories of most of these party members, I think is a missed opportunity because uh,
mm,
the religious structure of this world is so fascinating, and learning about sectism and what it does and the way it treats people, but then creates hope for other people, and then how the history of that and why it was started conflicts with the Mastari faith, and then
yeah,
those that reject any kind of faith. I think is really really fascinating because it ties much like the real world, and again, metaphorical parallels to the real world, ties uh, politics and religion and leadership all into one kind of inextricable ball, and that's just how how things have been for all of human history.
yeah.
Of religious
I,
leaders have power because they are influential figures and they're charismatic and they create systems and structures that teach people ways to believe, and the way that metaphor explicitly sets out to dismantle those and to challenge those, I think is a maybe the single most subversive aspect of this game, of watching sanctism and its history and the basically the pope of this game in Sanctifex Forden having this, like, he's the real villain. He's the reason
yeah,
why Rella did what she did, and Rella is the reason why Luis did what he did. So it really is Forden, and then I guess sort of the inaction of Hythlodaeus, the king, uh, like that causes all of this, and it's because religion and power are things that are intertwined, and especially in this world, I think it's really really smart. But youth is really the only one that has like religious themes, and especially in like your bonds. Um,
mm,
so I love the religious themes of this game, but like I mean, I guess you kind of learn like Heisme and like Ujif culture has this spirituality to them, but I know nothing about Stroll's history with that,
mm.
or Nearest's history with that. So yeah, I don't know. I like it, but there's definitely a hole that could have been filled with a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think like they sort of tease at that towards the end of the game where like Forden's been defeated and Godot is still around. He talks about
Barely.
how yeah, yeah. He talks about how I can't remember what point of the game it was, but it's after Forden's been dealt with.
Yeah.
He talks about how like I still like people still believe in sanctism because Forden was using it as a vehicle for corruption. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, they do also go back and say like I think in a way to sort of save themselves from being like anti-religion and
Mm.
anti-establishment. They were like, religion does actually have
Yeah.
benefits, and if people find faith in it and people find solace in this sort of belief, all well and good. That's what I find interesting about Godot's character
Mm.
as like the sort of counterweight to, because I think they've realized how heavy Forden's thing was. Because I mean, like you say, he is like the main orchestrator
Yeah.
of everything that happens in the game. Sure, he gets like offed, but then it's like, oh yeah, he groomed Rella to do that.
Hmm.
He was like, I'm going to kill your sister if you don't.
Hmm.
And then obviously pinned it on Luis later. Like, he is the main guy. And I think to just try and sort of give, I think it's in that theme of hope. I think I write about this
Yeah.
where I talked about how, despite everything and how hopeless it does seem, I left Metaphor feeling a feeling of hope,
Absolutely.
where
Yeah.
where like, okay, religion as like as it can be used for anything really is the same as anything. It can also be used for faith,
Yeah.
and people can
Hmm.
find comfort in that. And it's the same for everything. I think it's one of the most like I think that's where metaphor like again like I think I've said this about five different things, but
Hmm.
it's another area where this game really impressed me,
Yeah.
where it talks about this. Oh, we there is like a comfort,
Mm-hmm.
and that there are okay things here. It's just the people that are
Yeah.
the danger, and we need to be sure that we keep an eye on those people,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, like Fordham was not a good guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, he's kind of the
So
ultimate villain, and I think that the Rella storyline that comes very late in the game is fascinating because she's a character that you like, that you believe in for a lot of the game, and then there's the twist that she is the one that like in some way caused a lot of what the struggles that's going on. But then at the right as she's dying, she has this final like breath act that actually ends up causing a lot of hope for the country because sanctism is such a ever present force in this world, and she is a major part of that, especially because she becomes the sanctism. She's the candidate for sanctism after Forden
yeah,
dies.
she becomes a patron saint
It
almost.
well, literally, yeah, there's a moment when Forden dies, and it's revealed that it's revealed to the world that he did bad things and was orchestrating all of this, and then the people of the country are losing faith, and they're like, what are we going to do? Like, there's a lot of magla in the air, and there's a lot of humans showing up because the anxiety is spiked, and then Rella, who again was a part of this and is a villain in a way, has this final act where she tells the people to still like believe in themselves and like that we like through unity we can work together, and there's this moment where someone mentions that even though the people of sanctism have been taught these things that are not based in truth and they've been lied to all this time, and a lot of them do these terrible things of discriminating, and sanctism is then like splinters into like the igniter thing where they're doing experiments on people, and pushing people to the slums and like all these bad things. There's a moment where someone mentions that these people are the people that believe in sanctism just lost both of their biggest leaders. And can you imagine in their minds the trauma that causes them? Like everything that I've ever believed is built on lies, and the people that I believed in are now dead. And what am I going to do? And like that really stuck with me because I'm like, that is a very real thing of even with the negative consequences. It's very personally important, and I think this game does a really
Mm.
good job of setting up people, all the characters' goals as very personally important to them, and they believe in what they're doing not because they think that it's bad, even if it is causing great harm, but because it has been so personally important to them that they cannot see another way to get out of that. Like, this must be the solution because I have been taught this way and I have been doing this for so many years. And I just think that it's a really nuanced, mature theme to deal with. And it comes through many of these characters.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think again you've hit the nail on the head, but I enjoy how Metaphor doesn't like make a joke out of anything. It'd be very easy for them to like have these characters die and like really twist the knife and sort of
Yeah.
say like, yeah, look, the enemy's dead,
Hmm.
woohoo, and then like really like almost you know throw a party about
Hmm.
this. But the game really does take the time to sort of say, hey guys, you have done it, well done, but here's
Here's
sort
the
of the
consequences.
sort of here's the other side of
Yeah.
it. And I think that sort of again it ties back to this idea of, despite the harm that something might cause, there's a real dedication to making sure that everyone is humanized, everybody who is sort of understandable and meant to be understood is given the time to be understood.
Hmm.
And that's something that was really important. I think Rella, especially. I think I think in terms of like characters, she has to be like one of my favorites,
Yeah.
just in the fact that she, you know, I mean, she's introduced as like this like a mysterious figure, and then it's revealed like, oh, she's Juna's sister, and it's like, oh, that's great. We've got
Yeah.
someone on the inside now for Sanctism, and then obviously everything else happens. Like, she goes on a roller coaster and a
Yeah.
half. I think more than maybe any other character.
Yeah. Well, and
And
and she also exemplifies another great element of this game is tying in most characters to multiple characters. I think because
yes,
Rella is Juna's sister, because she has ties to Forden, because she has ties to the board, because she has ties to Sanctism, which then makes her a figure to the people of the country, and then also because she has this history with Basilio and Fidelio. I think is
Yes.
another great touch where then like Basilio and Juna have this connection because they both worked for Luis and believed in, well, Juna didn't believe in that, but like they were together a lot during that time. But then also there's this. I mean, I don't remember if I don't think Basilia knew that Rella was Juna's sister before the whole reveal, before he joins the party and stuff. But I like that there are these connections, these threads that you can draw to all the characters that make everything feel
Yeah.
very interconnected. And Juna is another character that I really want to talk about because I think that
Yeah.
she's my favorite party member. I think that the ways that the way that she's set up and then paid off is very similar to Basilio in that she's a character that's around and you quite know what she's doing, and then it twists and even though you spent some time with her before, she's part of your party. You're like, ooh, that's kind of cool. It's kind of clever. Um,
Yeah.
but then the fact that she also is someone with power and influence because she is a pop culture icon, more literally in the game, I think is fascinating. And her dynamic with the rest of the party because she has such a outspoken personality, I think is phenomenal. And then the quest line or the bond line that you go through, learning about her of someone that is very hopeful and helps put like other people at ease because of her talent and because she's just such an outgoing person. She still has this extra layer of what about this side of her that other people don't know about, and it creates
Mhm.
this really interesting texture that interacts with fame and with putting on a face and with the pressures put on her as a woman and as a songstress and as someone who's famous. And then you get this really heartfelt set of sequences with her where she reveals that as a Nydia, she has this side to her that is like her, I guess, true form, you might say.
Yeah.
And there are these lines that she says of like, I've never told anyone about this, and I don't think I ever would tell anyone about this, but I needed to tell someone about this and connect with someone about this because this has been weighing on me and I trust you enough as a protagonist to reveal this to you. And she doesn't reveal to the rest of the party, which I think is a really smart choice because it shows that she's
Mm.
not just suddenly totally open. This is something she has to work on over time, and revealing her true form to Will is the first step in like coming to a better grasp of herself and like being able to share this with more people. I thought that was like like a crazy reveal. Did not expect that at all. And it just she's a character I already loved. Like I immediately loved her, but that just like makes her an even more compelling character.
Yeah, yeah. Juna's Bond, I think, is probably out of the main party. I think probably my top three. I would say. It's definitely up there.
Mhm.
And I think it's the conversations about like her public obligation to the
Yeah.
church and how she is like forced to essentially like perform at these like sanctioned events, and the way that that sort of conflicts with her sort of as a party member is a really interesting dialogue that I'm very glad the game
Yeah.
had, because I feel like for a lot of people that was going to fly over their heads, where they were going to look at like, oh, but Juna's like fighting for the church. It's like, no, there's like a real sense of the reality of
Hmm.
performance and how like, okay, occasionally as an artist you do have to kind of pay the
Yeah. Hmm.
bills, um which I enjoyed. I very much enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And also just talking about like the cost of, you know, success and
Sure.
how that reflects on other people. I loved the I can't remember her name now, but the character in Juna's quest
Yeah.
line that is the
Other
sort of smaller
songstress. Yeah.
songstress who got upstage because Juna was here.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting sort of crossroads there where they talk about like, yeah, it's great to see someone doing well, but does this have a cost on somebody else? And the ways that it can be navigated, I think, was very, very, very good. Um, yeah, Juna in general, I think you've hit all the major points. I love how they handled her little like true form reveal. It was a nice little fun seeing what the Nidia were really like,
Hmm.
especially after like, because the game. I mean, it's a completely optional thing.
Hmm.
There's no guarantee that everybody's going to see that, because there's like a couple of illusions here and there that like people say, that, oh, the Nidia are like they're deceitful.
Yeah.
Don't let them don't let them swindle you.
Hmm.
Like with Alonso.
Definitely.
But you don't ever. in the main story you never actually get to get a sense of that.
Hmm.
So getting that in Juna's like level 6 or 7
Yeah,
bond, where it's like even just for a couple of seconds you see her in like her true form. I was like, okay, that's funny and cute, but also like quite a big moment
yeah,
because it is hidden away for the player and it is hidden away for Will.
yeah,
You have to put the work in, and there is a sense of trust there.
totally. Yeah, and
Um,
I love
and
the bonds being. This I think is the most like in my mind, most obviously structured element of this game is the bonds and how they create these like 2 to 3 minute sequences. And there's 8 of them for each of the bonds that you have, where you introduce a conflict, you resolve it, and then your bond grows as a result. And so. This is not necessarily a criticism, but like I felt my brain being like, okay, I can kind of predict what's going to happen here, because it's like, okay, well, we're going to introduce this. It's going to tie into a one later on, and then we're gonna like shake hands and be like, man, I trust you even more now. But I think that they did, because each bond's personality is so different, and because the way in which you interact with them is so different. It definitely keeps that on its toes. So it's not a major flaw, but I don't like. I just felt myself like feeling the structure a little bit there, but also like, what the fuck are you gonna do? You have to slice the story into 8 like sections, and it has to be compelling,
yeah,
and it has to have a little satisfying conclusion at the very end because your bond has deepened. Like they trust you more, and so like it definitely makes sense.
yeah, no, I definitely didn't have an. I didn't mind sort of that sort of structure to the bonds because I felt like, especially compared to Persona,
Hmm.
a metaphor was very much built to be like for everything to be seen by the player. I feel,
Oh yeah.
compared to Persona, where you have to on a first playthrough at least, you have to micromanage to get everything
Hmm.
done on the first playthrough. It's like you have to have a guide being like, go here on this day, study here, do this, eat this food. It takes the fun out of like the social sim elements. Like you can do that, but it takes away like sort of like impulsive exploration.
Hmm.
With metaphor, I did not have to consult. Well, I mean, I couldn't.
Yeah.
Um, but on my first playthrough, I was easily able to see all the
Hmm.
bonds, do all the dungeons, do everything I needed to do to see the whole story. And I feel like that speaks to the type of game that Atlus wants this to be. The calendar system, obviously returning from Persona, um, is it functionally it's quite similar, but it's in a completely different framework, and I think that's really interesting
Mm.
because it's even like in terms of how long this game is in terms of its chronology, it's like 4 months
Hmm.
in terms of the main story. Obviously, like you get a time skip at the
Yeah.
end, but in terms of like the beginning to the end, it's about 4 or 5 months. Compared to Persona's usually like 9 or 10.
Mm.
So you've got an entire progression condensed into that, and it feels like they've definitely got more of a idea of what they want to do. And the calendar system takes on this new sort of form where it works perfectly for this kind of political conflict
Yeah.
because you can see the changes over time. It's a bit different in Persona, but there is that sense of they Atlas want you to see everything,
Hmm.
and I love that. And
Yeah.
you can see that in like the bonds being slightly shorter from like 10 ranks to 8.
Mm. Oh, interesting.
But
Yeah, I forgot
and
about that. Yeah, interesting.
there's that sort of that there's a very similar structure between metaphor and persona actually, and it's not necessarily a critique, but it seems to me that the way that Atlas do social links now is each character has their own like mini antagonist,
Yes.
where like
Hmm.
it cannot be. I mean, in metaphor, it makes sense because it's important to their development and it really pushes them to improve and it pushes you to explore them. In Persona 5, it was the excuse of, hey guys, we need a new mini boss to fight. We need to
Mm.
have this like enemy character. And it ended up feeling like the focus was more on the
Hmm.
antagonist than the actual character you were talking to. Metaphor gets around that really well,
Yeah.
actually. I was really worried as I started doing some of the social bonds. Sorry,
Yeah.
they've all got different names.
Hmm.
Uh, the bonds where I saw I think it was Juna's that set off some alarm bells. Or no, it was Basilia. No, it wasn't. It was Juna's.
Hmm.
I think set off some alarm bells where I was like, oh no, we've got a character who's going to be like the actual focus of this
Yeah.
conversation, and Juna's going to be like a side character in her own bond. But No, every single one I think felt earned.
Yeah.
Every single one felt like, yeah, this is the conversation we're having, and this character is a really important part of that. I think the bonds in this game are almost universally better than the ones in Persona 5.
Hmm.
I think for that reason,
Sure.
not only just because of the characters being more interesting to
Sure.
me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
in general structure.
Yeah. You mentioned something about like them wanting to see them, the creators, the developers, making it feel like they want you to see everything. I don't know why that sentence was so hard for me to say. Uh, and that also this game takes place in terms of time scale in a much smaller, much smaller time scale than Persona games. But in the same breath, also this feels like a much grander game. It feels like you have a lot more impact if you go a lot more places because there's a sense of travel, which the Persona games aren't concerned with because they're all like located in like a single place or whatever. But I really think that that's a very interesting part of this game because the travel aspect of it and the fact that the map is then structured in a way that you have to then deal with the amount of time that it takes for your gauntlet runner to get places, I think is a really like that's the most I think the smartest spin on the time structure of the game of if you want to do a dungeon, you want to visit another place, you have to think about how long it's going to take for you to get there. And you can do certain things on the Gauntlet Runner that you can't do at other places. So then that pushes you to want to go out and do things a little bit more. I think that it's a really smart way that like on a design level the game sets itself apart from the previous games that Atlas has made, but also thematically the fact that this is a journey around the world and you get a sense of the different areas of culture and what different parts of different tribes with different cultural identities because they're in a different area, like it all intersects in really interesting ways and you get this whole like sort of xenophobia element to the story where different places don't like other places and they fear the other places. I just think it's a smart way to show many sides because that's what this game is really
Mm,
about is coming together and trying to understand the perspective of others and finding common ground and helping each other to build a better world in the future. And the fact that you visit each city and help the people there and do side quests for the people there, and then also because the Gauntlet Runner interacts with your protagonist's ability to teleport, you can also then revisit all these places once you visit them the first time. Like that's a very gamey thing, but narratively it is kind of makes sense in some dumb horseshit way. But it also
yeah,
like structurally keeps you constantly scattered, like going around the map and like tell like hitting R1 to check all the different maps and teleport to different places. Like, oh, well, I can buy this kind of stuff there because this place is really good at making igniters or fish or whatever it is. Like, it gives the world a sense of variety and place that I think is really special, especially in the moments that along the journey you get this narration that I think is well done, and you also get these moments like stop by and see the sights and like stop and smell the
yeah,
roses. Really, like it's a short time scale, but a lot of this game is spent like hanging out and getting to know the people you're working alongside and helping the little guy and stopping and seeing the sights because that's just something that is emotionally impactful and resonant. And
yeah,
like even though this game's technically go from like a narrative thrust perspective, it's like you've only got 20 days to do this. Oh god, the world's gonna explode. uh so like a lot of the time because of how it's paced in the fact that uh I think there aren't as many bonds and it isn't as structured or as rigid, it does feel like there's still some space to take a breather. And I think that that helps the pacing of the game feel a lot less stressful, I guess, which is I think is really nice.
yeah. The travel aspect is something that I think it's absolutely genius from Atlas's perspective, because I think on paper, if you write down like what is Metaphor about and what is Persona about, like like on like in pure like explorable area, Metaphor doesn't actually have that much more than Persona, but it feels so much bigger
Yeah.
because of, like you say, this element of like you actually do, time does come into that,
Hmm.
and that sense of like that addition of like occasionally when you're traveling to a new dungeon, it's like, hey guys, here's this really cool place that you can just look at
Hmm.
for a few minutes and have a nice little conversation. Like, it's very clever. You like, from a development standpoint, it's a very clever way of injecting some life into the world and having some absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, I screenshotted almost all
I've
of
got
them.
yeah, I've got the oh, what was it? The Crimson, the Ocean one,
Oh, with the walls of the
in
water.
Etri. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, that one's my screensaver at the moment.
sure.
But it is like it's a really clever way of having these really beautiful areas. That's like awesome. We've seen this. This world feels wonderful. Let's carry on. Like that was a really big focus for the marketing, and I can see why now. I initially thought like, oh, it's just a road trip. It's like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then like if we started stopping, we started having fun conversations about
Yeah,
like, hey guys, what if I put my hand in the water? It was such a fun little thing, and added that extra bit of flavor
yeah.
onto the cast.
Well, definitely because
I love that.
almost all of those locations you stop and then like 4 or 5 characters will give their input on it, and then Eurus will
Yeah.
draw it and he'll give a little thing, and then someone will be like, I have to piss, so let's get back to the gauntlet runner, and then you take the drawing and you give it back to Maria because she can't see the world, and so it ties this mechanic to the identity of the world, to the characters, to number of the characters. I just think this game is very intermeshed in the way that its themes
Very.
interact with characters, impact the gameplay and the structure and the pacing. And one thing we haven't really talked about, because frankly, to me, it's the least interesting part of the game, but is the is the combat and the dungeons and the archetype
Mm,
structure for like class system or whatever. Talk a little bit about that because I think you're probably more invested in it than me, particularly because I
yeah.
just want to. I should have posited this at the very beginning, but I played this game on storyteller difficulty, which is easy mode, but also if you die in a battle, you can just respawn immediately and like continue progress and like you're at full health and mana or whatever. Um,
Does it respawn you from the point in the
yeah,
battle you
yeah, you
were?
just pick back
Oh,
up. Like
okay.
so you literally can't lose. And
All right.
I played that because I played that mode because I played these games for their narratives, and I don't particularly care for the dungeon exploration, for learning the combat and like and the synthesis and all that. I thought that it was more interesting here than in most turn-based RPGs I've played, but because I played it on Storyteller, I also beat this game in 47 hours, which is much shorter than what most people are seeing this game through. But also, I'm so fucking glad that I was able to see this
Yeah.
game to the end, and that it didn't bug me with its length. Like Persona 5, like Persona 5 got worse as I went because I'm like, I just want to fucking tap through this. I don't give a shit. Another fucking dungeon? Are you kidding me? Another party member? And then in
Yeah.
Persona 5, when you get to the end, and you're fighting like God or whatever. I'm like, I couldn't care less. I don't give a shit. This is fucking dumb because I played this
Yeah.
game for 90 hours. But an under 50-hour RPG here with a full experience, I thought was remarkable. And also, I was able to do that and enjoy this game as much as I did because they gave me the option to put it on storyteller difficulty. Talk a little bit about the combat, the dungeons. Like, how do you feel about all that?
Yeah. No, I mean the combat. I played on normal
Mm-hmm.
difficulty just to sort of get an idea for like a general idea of what the difficulty was going to be like.
Yeah,
I've spoken to folks who did play it on hard. I've not seen anybody who's played it on regicide yet
yeah.
because you have to play through the game twice, and if anybody's done that, I'm like, what the hell? Um, where have you found the time?
Mm-hmm.
But normal difficulty was really good. Combat in general felt like very distinct. Oh, I'm having to completely change gears now.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I just want to make
so
sure we didn't forget about that because it's a part of the game.
yeah, yeah. So the archetype system in general is a very big departure from Persona. It takes that customizability of the protagonist and basically gives it to every
Mm-hmm.
single character and goes like mad with it. There's
Yeah.
no real like fusion calculate. He's already getting tired. Um,
Oh, we're talking
uh,
about combat.
uh, but yeah, so the archetype
Wake
system
me up
is
when we
very
get to
much.
themes.
Oh, but it like
I'm just gonna
this is
fuck around.
another thing that ties into it. This ties into itself
It does.
actually.
No, I know.
I think the bond system, as we talk about bonds and leveling up, that is how you unlock
Yeah.
archetypes, and you unlock most bonds through the story.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, you get a very basic set of archetypes, and as you develop those bonds, you unlock advanced and then elite archetypes. And you spend currency to learn them, and you rank them up over the course of the game. And those very much tie into the builds, and each character has their own each main party member has their sort of forte. Like Hulkenberg comes equipped with the knight archetype,
Yeah.
and that's where she performs best. But then to get her level 2 archetype, you need to invest in the mage, lineage,
Yeah.
and then go into Magic Knight and so on. There's like a lot of interplay between the archetypes
Yeah.
there, which I thought was really interesting and encourages me to, or encourages you to actually try different
Mm-hmm.
things. Like, what if I did put Stroll into Magic? Not that I did,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought it might be good to get him some like buffing or debuffing skills. Um, and like that's over the course of the whole game, and you spend time getting to know like what works best and what doesn't. Combat in like minute to minute, there's like the overworld action combat, which is sort of, it felt a bit like Persona 5 Strikers to me. In that it felt, the game definitely wasn't
No.
built for it.
And
It was
some of them
it,
feel way worse than others.
yeah, each archetype has its own like approach to attack, and God forbid if you're using the healer,
Yeah.
don't do that. But yeah, there's like an
I think
overworld
that I think
combat
that
bit
that's
that,
the like on a polish and design level. I think that's probably the worst part of the game. Is
yeah.
going through dungeons and using like your 1 to 3 hit melee combo that's really janky
Mm,
and like sometimes doesn't quite hit the enemies properly. It's like, okay, well, it's clearly you didn't put the full effort here. I think that on
yeah,
a conceptual design level, I think it's really smart in keeping things a little bit faster paced, especially if you're playing on a lower difficulty. I didn't have to do most of the battles in the dungeons, which is really like that's probably what contributes to my runtime being so much smaller.
yeah.
um
Mine was about 80.
yeah, exactly. And so I really like it from an accessibility point of view, a pacing point of view. But it is very clear that this is not something they'd like. They put as much effort into making sure was as fluid and fun and as polished as the turn-based combat. I mean, obviously, but
Yeah,
to praise the turn-based combat where I can,
turn-based combat is great.
is that I think that this is the snappiest turn-based combat I've ever done. The fact that you can kind of animation cancel and, like when you like choose a move,
Mm,
you can just like tap it and it'll like go away like immediately and you can move on to the next thing. And you can you can just tap through the moves really quickly and things flow together and the animations are really nice. And it makes it feel very responsive, even though it is turn-based and you can sit there and choose and go through your menu as long as you want. The fact that everything feels like it's like the camera's like panning between things like in really smooth ways no matter how fast you're doing it. It feels really it's the most like real-time responsive turn-based
action.
combat
Yeah,
actually turn-based combat ever done. I mean, obviously something like Paper Mario and Luigi have like an actual action combat element to them, but I've always felt with like the active time battle system and things like Final Fantasy 7, it's interesting, but I've always felt like, well, it's not that different from just straight up
yeah,
turn-based combat. Like I almost can't really pin down how it's different. But in this is turn-based combat. Is straight up take as long as you want turn-based combat, but because the animation and the speed of the game is able to respond to however quickly you want to tap through these things, it feels like you're like boom, bam, bam, oh, make this guy do this, make that guy do
yeah.
that, and it's just really really satisfying.
When you know what you want to do, it can feel like you're just executing a command, and then like a huge move comes out. It feels brilliant.
Yeah.
But in terms of like the actual mechanics of the turn-based combat, because I imagine I got a little bit more out of it on
Oh,
normal
totally.
difficulty
Yeah.
than you
I
did.
didn't care
Like
to.
the I mean, that's completely fair. The press turn system comes back from Shin Megami Tensei 3, which is another sort of title that is sort of an inspiration here.
Mhm.
And that system of like exploiting weaknesses and getting more turns out of
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
and the cost of like, oh, I hit an enemy with something that it absorbs, I'm literally losing all my turns.
yeah,
On normal difficulty, it, even on normal, it felt like that was quite punishing
yeah.
at times. Like if you accidentally,
Whiff an
it made
attack.
me really think about buffs
Yeah,
and debuffs and stuff like that, which is great in games like Persona 5, which was more built around the baton pass, which was completely broken.
hmm
That system was built around like keeping that momentum. Metaphor was far more thoughtful because you didn't get to keep your turn. It was, you get an extra one, which goes to the next person. I found myself really thinking about my order of my party, formations, and
mm.
like synthesis skills as well that
Yeah,
cost multiple icons. And like early game, that would be like, oh, do I want to pay 3 turn icons to get a party wide buff? that's using all of my turns, but it's a good buff. There's a real like cost. Like there's so much to this combat system, and it only gets more and more as you go on.
Yeah.
One thing that did it's not really a critique, but one slight thing that I noticed is the fact that every single party member and their like ultimate archetype, so to speak, or the royal archetype,
Yeah.
it's called.
Yeah.
It was unquestionably their best option,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't tend to really like
Hmm.
that because it kind of stands in contrast to everything that you've done up until that point, where it's like, oh, you've built this party and you like experimented with it. By the way, here's like the nuclear option
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is like the best one going into the final
Mm-hmm.
dungeon.
And they give you
You have to put in more.
weapons for each of them that give them a shitload of damage. And like, yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely understand. It does feel slightly at odds with the variety of the archetype system, which in some ways I think people have made parallels to Final Fantasy V, which is a game I haven't played, but I know is similar in that you can equip any character with any class in your party. But my mind goes to my touchstone being the Esper system from Final Fantasy VI, where you can give
yes,
any spell to any character. And this definitely felt like that to me, where I would realize, like, oh, I want to make sure that I have, because there's some pretty powerful things that, like, take away any buffs that an enemy has on them, or like will draw aggro or things like that. And I'm like, I want to make sure that I want this person on my team, which means I'm not having this other person on my team that has this ability. Oh, I can just like spec into this for a little bit, learn that move, and then switch over to the other thing, and then inherit that move and pay like 1,000 magla or whatever. That I think to me was the smartest experimentation element of this, because yeah, any person
yeah,
or any party member could have any archetype, but the fact that they could then have inherited any moves from any ones that you also invested in, I thought was really really smart to be able to like fully like to the atomic level customize your party
yeah.
however you wanted to.
My touchstone with this actually is the Bravely Default games. It
Mm,
very much reminded me of those, where I think it builds on that Final Fantasy sort of five system of you have a primary job that your character sort of draws their stats
yeah.
from, and then you have like a support job, which is like, oh, if you want to, for instance, you're equipped with a black mage, you could equip like support skills from white mage, and then it's like, oh, you've got offense and you've got healing. It felt very similar to that, just on like another level, like you say, with being able to literally pick and match anything that you want.
Yeah.
And I did enjoy that to some extent. I found it could be a little like there were some times I think towards the end game where I was like, this feels a little bit clunky with
Sure.
how many things that were going on. I was a little bit sad that like there was no way to like just auto equip some stuff.
Yeah, no, definitely, because
That's
you have
one
to
of the
go through
things.
in each individual archetype and then re-inherit the move, or well, you don't have to re-inherit them, but you have to like set them again. And that was
Yeah,
definitely something,
there
because you're
was
switching your archetypes quite a bit, especially by the end when you. I mean, I don't know how it was for you on normal, but I was getting so many of the like Hero's Leaf of Light and like those things that just like they're basically the rare candies or whatever. That allowed me
yeah,
to just be like specking people into a bunch of different options so I could build up their arsenals. And every time you switch it, you're like, okay, well, I want to make sure they're getting experience for this. But then when I put them into battle, they're like, they're level 1 with that. I'm like, oh, that's a little bit disappointing. And then, oh, I forgot to inherit the moves from the other thing.
yeah.
So like, I don't have as many options now. And you're like,
I
you
did
throw
have
into
that.
battle and you're like, Juna has one move. Fuck. What am I going to do?
Yeah, no, I had that a couple of times. I wish there was sort of like an auto equip system. One other thing that I find really funny, you mentioned like the Hero Leaf of Light and stuff. One of the major critiques that I read before, like for people lucky enough to get the game for the embargo,
Mhm.
was that like I read a review that was talking about how you know like it was so tedious leveling up like archetypes. I'm like, how? I like, but by the end of the game, I had so many of these items.
Yeah.
I just had like everybody on a rank 20 archetype, and then I was like, oh, I've got like 99 of the XP items now out of nowhere. I'm now going to level up everybody into their ultimate archetype, and I
Mhm.
did that in the final dungeon.
Yeah, me too.
And it was the same with people talking about like MP management as well, which I don't imagine was a problem for you. Um,
No.
I remember reading like because it's very much a Persona thing where MP items are a
Yeah.
privilege. You get an MP item and you feel that you're like, oh my god,
The funniest
this
thing is like
is
there is one shop in most of the towns where you can buy, I think, three of like a middle tier
yeah,
MP restoring item, and like I like that felt so limiting to me. Not that I necessarily struggled with it, but I was expecting to be able to manage that slightly more by going to shops.
yeah,
That I would go and visit that person almost every day because I'm like, well, it's got to restock at some point. And then after like
no,
2 weeks of doing it, I'm like, no, they're just out. I'm like,
yeah,
what?
no more fruit cordial,
Fuck
no
yeah.
more
Yeah,
fruit
yeah, exactly. It
cordial
was
for
that
me.
item. Yeah, exactly. That's a really
But
odd decision to like completely limit that.
just like well, I mean, the funny thing about that was because I thought I hit that problem as well in the final dungeon, and I went to Neuro, so I was like, what do I do? I've got no MP items, and he was like, oh, I've just got an infinite stock of like 50 MP
What?
healing items.
What?
You can buy MP restoration items in the final dungeon, which I thought was
Oh,
hilarious.
okay, okay. Well, I never had to. I never went back to him, so that's why I never saw that. But
Yeah,
that's
which was
interesting. Yeah, I didn't even know about that.
yeah, like I remember reading. I remember speaking to a few people who said like, oh yeah, I had to like properly grind out the final boss, and it took me nearly 2 hours because I ran out of MP, and I was like, you do know that you could have like just used the shop, and they were like, what?
Yeah.
Which is, I felt like I'd opened their third eye with that one. That was quite funny, but the MP management, I think, it people were, I think I don't know what difficulty people were playing on, but
Mm-hmm.
I felt like on normal it was perfectly good, and again, like it all very much felt perfectly well balanced on normal.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that normal was it certainly wasn't as easy as Persona 5, but it wasn't as difficult as this might be tough for you because you haven't played them. But SMT3 is a notoriously difficult game, even on normal.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely wasn't like that. It was a really nice balance between the two. It did get to the point wherever I got like ambushed by an enemy, I had to like just run away immediately. I was like,
Yeah.
"There's no point." But that does remind me of another thing: the instant retry feature
Oh
in
yeah.
battle. Lovely. I love that feature. I think more games should do that.
Yeah. You remember when people got
I
mad at
think
Final Three Houses for having that? They're like, oh, that ruins
yeah,
everything. Ah, shut the fuck up.
it ruins every. No, like I mean that's the thing, right? Where it's like people who do that are like other people who reset every single time they lose a unit,
Yeah.
and it's like the game is giving you a solution
Yeah. Don't
to
you
this
don't have to close the
problem.
game.
You don't have to close the game. You can stay immersed.
Mm-hmm.
It's such an interesting thing because I think it is those people that got mad. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, they're giving you a way to rewind time. It's like, well, you were gonna do that anyway.
Well,
You
that's an
you
interesting
you
thing
just gonna
with
reload
like
and also
people complaining about like certain accessibility features, or that is an accessibility feature in like the like or quality of life, I guess is maybe the better term to
yeah.
use. It's a quality of life feature that people are like, well, I don't want to be given the option because then I might use it. I'm like, it's
And
very much
you
the you control the buttons you press thing. Like you're just a
yeah.
jackass. Like you just want people to not be able to play the game or enjoy the game as much because you have no self control. Like, shut the fuck up.
I'm gonna have to find that Doom tweet where it's
Yeah,
like you control the buttons you
yeah,
press.
yeah,
It's like just if it just don't do it
yeah.
then. If it's that much of an issue, just don't do
Yeah,
it.
but I like
Um
the like you just click on the stick and you just right to the beginning. It's very and also
yeah.
it's interesting. That is it's a great thing that they added it, but it is clear that it is mismatched with one element of the battle system, which is the weaknesses, because you can
Yes.
attack them, know if it's effective, not effective, blocked, whatever, and then you can restart the battle and you will keep that. I think that's fine, but I don't. I mean, obviously it was intentional, like they knew that was going to happen, but it's clear that that's slightly at odds with the learning
Yeah.
of the weaknesses and things.
I'm a little bit curious about the weakness system actually because I felt like I had a couple of enemies where I fought them in a dungeon and I didn't hit their weaknesses.
Yeah.
I just killed them outright, and then in the next battle, the game gave me their weaknesses, just without me
Oh
actually
well, no, yeah,
working
it's
them out.
it's like it's kind of like
Um,
Pokemon. Like if you it's like
yeah,
complete their Pokedex entry or whatever, you know what they're weak to.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think the game is less focused on like this sort of mystical, like, oh, what's this enemy weak to, and you having to remember that. It's more focused on letting you have that information and be like, here's what you.
hmm
It's about what you do with that information
yeah,
rather than getting the information, and I think that's quite good, especially in the case of some late game enemies. I had there's one. Did you do the dragon towers at the
I
end of
did
the
one of
game?
them. I didn't do all three.
You did one
Yeah.
of them. I did. Depending on which one you did, there's one of them
I think I did the
which
one that's near
repels.
Etria.
Yeah, I think that might be the one that like, or it might be one of those things where it's like you do this one first, and then the second one is always
Oh yeah,
something else.
maybe that might be it. But, so what was the first one, or
But
what was the thing you were like had a hard time with?
the dragon that I was talking about was the one that repels all damage except like Almighty.
Mm-hmm.
Like it reflects it back at you, whatever you do. And in a combat situation like that, I'm imagining how this like because I think I spent like a turn because I assumed I
The
was like,
first
oh,
dragon that I
it
did
won't
at the
be.
tower was the hardest thing I fought in the game. So I'm sure that
Yeah,
the second and third ones are even more difficult. But whichever one I fought,
those
I can't remember
fights
what it
were
was. I mean, it was easily the hardest one I fought in the game.
those fights were difficult, and I mean it was good. I really like to see that. But the one that I was thinking of when it comes to like thinking about the weaknesses, I was like, oh, I'm gonna charge up with Basilio, and I'm gonna buff our attack. I'm gonna lower its defense, and this is gonna go down in one hit. I hit it, and it like repelled like 10,000 damage back at me, and I was like, oh right. And then at that point, I was like, okay, I'm happy that I can restart now, and I feel like this is just a quality of life thing
Yeah,
more than like a because I spent time working that out. It would have been really annoying for the game just to be like, oh, you just have to like suffer now.
yeah.
You just have to like struggle.
You're going to lose this
Also,
battle, and then you have to restart.
also the same with the protagonist, like with Will,
Mhm.
not being like an instant game over if he dies.
Oh
Huge quality of
yeah,
life thing.
no,
That I mean,
Joker! Ah, fuck off! You guys keep
I can't,
fighting.
I can't believe that that was even a thing
Yeah,
that we put up with for that many games. It's such a silly thing where it's like, just use a revival
yeah,
item, dude.
yeah.
Like,
We got plenty of them.
like I normally don't like do the leap through logic for things like this, like because you can do it for anything in RPGs where it's like, why didn't they just use a revival item on this character when they die? It's like I don't normally question it because I don't think it's worth it, but when it comes to that, I'm like, dude, just use a
Yeah,
revival item.
we have 7
So I'm very glad.
party members. We're gonna be fine.
Yeah, so I'm very glad actually that that's probably like my biggest like positive change for metaphor was like, oh, Will is not the deciding factor
Yeah,
here, which is good. Even though he never really died, he was busted.
yeah, that's true. Yes, especially because I gave him like every one of the like you'll get. They're a lot like the like items in Pokemon that's like special attack up or whatever.
Yeah,
You I get a bunch of them. Like I just give them all to him. He's
yeah,
gonna be
it's
like
like
incredibly busted. I also love doing that
he's.
with games like just make the protagonist like insanely overpowered. I just always do that.
I mean, he's the one that's always going to be there.
True,
Like I have to deal with him
that's a
the
good
whole
point.
game. You might as well be the one to get all the buffs.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, that's the thing. I did unfortunately find myself like towards the end of the game, as much as I loved Heisme,
hmm
I just didn't really find a use for him,
hmm
and I was like, "This is sad." But that does speak to like how fun the other classes were.
hmm
I had Yufa and Juna in my party
yeah,
until like all the way up until the end,
and they play
just because
totally differently when
yeah,
they're
I
using
thought the
their core
systems around
archetypes. That is.
yeah, the system around Royal or Mass Dancer
hmm
and Summoner was so interesting,
Yeah.
and I think in terms of especially referencing their other games, like
Yeah.
having Devil Summoner, I was like, oh, that's fun. That's Shin Megami
And
Tensei,
then there's Persona
and
Master.
then and there's Persona Master. I was like, oh, this is fun.
Yeah.
They said the thing, um, and they also have
But I
a
also
really
like
awesome.
that they didn't do what they've done with all their other like SMT game adjacent games is like this is not attached to those. I think there might be like something where like Jack Frost shows up for like an animation or something. I think I saw that like
Yeah,
online somewhere. But
that's Devil Summoner.
but that is the only like that and like calling the other thing Persona Summoner or Persona Master is the closest that you get to like the references to other things. And I'm glad that they are now, I don't know, like confident enough to start a new IP that is in the same vein, but like
Yeah,
this is a new world. This is it works similarly, but it's entirely different because I think that something that is interesting about the SMT verse is that it's got all these other games that are tangentially connected to it, but also mostly not. And so, like at a certain point, it's like, well, but just make it its own IP. Like, just change
Yeah,
like two small things, and then it wouldn't be connected. And then I don't know. I get like some weird like cognitive dissonance of that, but the fact that this is an entirely new IP outside of those very very small references, I think is smart. Oh, another another fascinating reference that they have is fucking Katharina, who looks a lot like fucking Catherine with a Q from Full Body,
yeah,
but and her name is Catherine. I'm like, I think that might be the thing that like made me make sure I was going to download the game. I'm like, is this real? Like it just looks like the fucking thing from the other game.
yeah.
Very
I,
funny.
I honestly like I didn't clock that until someone mentioned it to
Oh,
me.
okay.
I love Catherine Full Body,
Yeah,
and I was like, oh yeah, I guess that is true that she looks like Ren,
yeah,
and also she is called Katharina.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I honestly haven't clocked it, but yeah, no, I'm in the same boat. I'm honestly shocked that they didn't go down the route of like having Joker
Mhm.
as a secret boss in this
Oh,
game.
yeah, yeah.
Because they just did it for the Persona 3
Oh,
DLC. I
okay.
was
Yeah.
like,
Oh, I
oh,
heard about that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, oh, they're gonna do it. They're gonna have like a Persona.
They do
They're gonna have the
have
Persona 3
they have
protagonist.
purchasable skins,
Yeah,
outfits
but
that are like Persona 3, 4, and 5 related, I think.
I can't think of anything what like
But also
I don't
Sega
mind
loves
it
to
in
do
Persona.
that. Sega just does that with
Yeah,
everything. Fuck you, play as
I don't.
Ichiban in a fucking monkey ball, you dumbass. Okay, yeah, well.
Yeah, I don't like that in Metaphor. Like, I don't mind it in Persona 5 because it feels a little bit more like, oh, they're wearing the school uniforms from like another school. I'm like, eh, okay,
Yeah,
sure, I can maybe buy that. With Metaphor, I'm like, no, these are adults
yeah.
doing adult things in a fantasy
And
world.
there's also not really
Hearing Last
fashion.
Surprise feels wrong.
There's also not
Yeah,
really fashion in
um,
this game. Like the characters are wearing things that are befitting to their like status, to the like the role that they fill in this world. Um, and so like it does feel very like, oh well, we gotta have like some way for them to buy microtransactions, like get an extra $7
yeah.
out of them or whatever.
we've got we've got to make sure that the fans remember that guys, it's okay. This is like Persona. It can be like Persona,
Yeah,
and I'm like, I can't think of anything worse. Like with how good the sound and how distinctive the soundtrack
hmm
is. Like what? Like you have the battle theme for this game, and it's like so completely different from anything from Persona. I cannot imagine listening to Persona's music while playing
yeah,
Metaphor. It feels like completely wrong to me.
yeah.
Um,
Well, let's talk a little bit
I'm not
about
going to be
the
buying that DLC.
let's talk a little bit about the last aspect of this game that we have, which is the aesthetic, which is the art
Mm,
style, the music, the tone, the animations, things that are certainly inspired by the art style and design that they've built up over the course of Persona 3, 4, and 5. But Metaphor, I think, takes it to next level. I mean, I think that this is one of the most
absolutely, yeah.
impressively art directed games I've ever seen. I think that it does something really smart in its budgeting, which is the fact that it's a low poly game for the most part. I mean, the character models and environments are pretty simple, and the texture work is pretty simple, but it balances that with this like watercolor aesthetic on a lot of things, and these shadow effects that are like these crosshatch like animated sort of things that give it a very distinct sense of place and texture and style,
Yeah,
that isn't hyper realistic. Of course, I don't want Atlus to ever make a hyper realistic game necessarily, but I think that this feels even more different from Persona 5 than I expected, because it does all the flashy menus and the big letters and the offset things, but
yeah,
because it's using a mixture of fonts and it's using a mixture of watercolor and hand sketch and like medieval painting and like these different things, and then it's drawing artistic sources from things like that the utopian novel you mentioned earlier, or
yeah,
there's lots of Hieronymus Bach in the
yeah.
human designs. It feels like it's taking inspiration from art, from like you walked into a fucking museum, like you
And here,
and they just like they take a little bit of literature here, they take a little bit of painting here and some sculpture, and it's like, whoa, like no games are really doing what this game does in terms of um
yeah,
aesthetic inspiration, and it's such a fascinating mishmash of of like Roman things and like Middle Ages art and like literature from the 1800s and things. Like, oh, this is just so fascinating.
Yeah, no, I think again you're
Did
right
I
to
did I
point
hit the
out
nail on the
like
head?
you did the sort of like a low like the you throw me off now.
Sorry, sorry.
The like the amount of artistic
Hmm.
inspirations here is really incredible, and I think you're right to say that it plays with its budget very well. We
Yeah.
talked about this earlier with like the sort of sightseeing spots where like you can't explore them, but you just see them from a
Hmm.
distance, and it's just like a really nice. I they're not 2D, but they're like almost panoramas and like
Hmm.
di- almost dioramas in a way.
Hmm.
Um, and like those scenes are beautiful,
Yeah.
and like because each city, like despite being absolutely huge, like Grand Trad is like three
Hmm.
areas that you walk
Yeah. Yeah.
around. They use that space very well. They populate it. They do stuff with it, and the same is true for Brylehaven, for Martira,
Hmm.
for Altabury.
Hmm.
They play with their space very well, and like again, like mentioning the watercolor and like the really like hand painted look to the characters, especially
Oh,
in
the
like the up
portraits.
close cutscenes.
I think the character portraits are maybe the most like beautiful single like sprites or whatever I've seen in a video game. I think
They
they're
are,
phenomenal. They're some of the best things I've ever
they
seen.
are, they're really really good, and even like down to the small details. Like I saw someone talk about how outside, like when you're on the gauntlet runner, it can look a little like it does look low poly at points,
Yeah.
but like the additional detail of like the magla in the
Oh, sure.
air,
Yeah.
like, and oh my god, like the scenes like when the gauntlet runner's stopping for the night and it shows like a view outside into the distance and you just see like the white magla in the air as the sky darkens. It's like, yeah, like if you took that away it would probably look quite ugly.
Hmm.
But the magla adds so much. Like again, there's this dedication to this like artistic vision that I've
Yeah.
not seen in a game in such a long time. Normally there's like one or two things where I'm thinking, oh okay, like I can see where the corners were cut here. I think Atlus looked at this and said, right, here is, because this game was in development for a very very very
Very
long
long time.
time.
Yeah, which is fascinating that we
um
mention that it does feel like it is playing to its strength of budget, but this is still a very high budget game in that it took a
oh
long time to make.
absolutely.
There's a lot of content, there's a lot of voice acting, there's fully animated anime cutscenes for. I mean, there's probably like an hour's worth of them in the game, or like 90
Abs-
minutes or something like that, which is not
more
cheap.
than I think more than I think most of their other
Yeah,
games. I think certainly more than Persona 3 Reload, more than Persona 5 I think originally did. Um there's a lot here, and I think they know where they want to put that
yeah.
budget.
And to me, it's
They don't
mostly
waste
in
time.
the in like the menus and the hand painted character portraits and things I was mentioning. I think my favorite like design details of the experience are in those menus and seeing the when you select the party and you've got like all the fate like the what's it the profiles of the
Yeah,
characters are like stacked up. I think that those are gorgeous, and then you go into like their equipment and you see like each character has like their own hand, and it's like sticking out, and like it's just a small touch that makes it feel very customized and very like richly
yeah,
detailed. And again, I really like the mix of fonts that they use, and like words will be like different sized fonts, like the fucking like Loki logo, like but like it's just this like really fascinating design choices that didn't need to be made. Like the game would still be beautiful if they and richly detailed if they didn't put all this effort into, especially the menus. But I think
mm,
it's those extra touches that make it feel like a premium experience. And
yeah.
obviously that's where the budget and the time and the effort went.
Atlus have kind of written themselves into a corner here. I think Persona 5 did such a brilliant job
Yeah, of course.
with its UI, and it's like, this is what people know Persona for, and this is what people know Atlus for now. So every single time they make a new game, there has to be like, I think I think it might have been Hashino came out in an interview recently
It's
and
like,
said that, developing these menus is really
yeah,
annoying
yeah,
actually, but we do it anyway. And I think like that they've set themselves up for it, and each time they manage to really like succeed themselves. I think Metaphor is so good because it plays with, like you say, the fonts, but also color. I think Metaphor, the way that it plays with color, is really interesting because it kind of breaks away from what Atlas normally does with Persona 3, 4, 5, Each one has like its own color. Like blue is the theme for 3,
Yeah.
yellow is 4, and red is 5. With Metaphor, it's like it's every single color.
Yeah,
It's
well,
all of
it's
them.
every color, but it's also within a limited and very rich color palette. I think my favorite
Yes,
location in the game that it speaks to the color palette of this game that I think works so well is the Hush Honeybee Inn. I think that when you walk in there and there's these rich golds and browns making up the walls, and you have like these little like bunches of garlic and like herbs hanging from the walls and stuff, and you have Stroll in his like sort of dark mustard yellow, and the red Hulkenberg's like bright red hair, but it's not like a Persona 5 red. It's got this sort of orange tint to it, and then Will has
mm,
this dark blue. It's like Lucina or Crom's color hair. Like it creates this really interesting color palette where it's like soft off whites and like graphite grays and browns and golds. And I mentioned this to you, but it's something that really sticks out to me is I really fucking hate Yufa's pants because Yufa's pants are the only thing of the party that don't fit into the color palette. Like you look
it's
at the,
green.
they're just like a bright lime green, like straight up lime green.
Yeah,
Everything else is whites and blues and golds and reds or like the browns of like Nurse's skin. Like everything fits in so well. And there's these fucking pants like, I can't get my eyes off of. And I'm like, God, like they were just orange. Like her brother Denny has this orange cloak that I think
yeah.
fits so well into this color palette. But then she has green pants. I'm like, I don't know why. It
Stop
bugs the shit
staring
out of
at
me.
Yufa's pants, man.
Well, you don't see anything other than like her thighs, so it's not like pervy.
Yeah, yeah.
But, but obviously they wanted me to
No,
look at
I
them
could,
because they're fucking bright green. God.
her coat is absolutely
Yeah, I
gorgeous
love the
though. I
coat.
love her coat.
And the like sort of uh like I don't know, like Lay's chip colored hair that she has. I think fits very well. But yeah, I don't know. I love the color palette of this game. I think it's gorgeous. And would
Yeah,
be I wouldn't be particularly surprised if it didn't win like best art direction or whatever at the Game Awards because I think Neva also is giving it like real competition. But this is one of the strongest art styles I've ever seen in a game.
yeah. I think it definitely is up there. I'm very excited to see. Wow, it's one of those things. I think with Atlus now, the question will always be not out of that this wasn't good enough, but it's like how are they going to top
Yeah.
this in the next one?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's always that question now, and I think Atlus have constantly one up themselves. Where it's like, oh my god, guys, we made like the best, like the one of the most stylish looking games of all time. Hey guys, what if we did it again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why
Every
this
single
game
time, and
takes 7.5 years to make or whatever.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think every aspect, the more like I talk about it, the more it feels like every single thing. It wasn't like one thing came first; it was everything came back into
Mm-hmm.
itself. I mean, even down to like as annoying as it should be at this point, the phrase "time marches on" and the dawn of a new king draws nearer.
Yeah.
I think that phrase should be seared into my brain at this point. Even that, like the visual of that, like the ticking clock and how it pans in on
Mm-hmm.
like the prince lying down and like the vines and stuff. It's all so well thought out. I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely love it. It's brilliant.
Yeah. The final thing I actually do want to talk about before we go, we're almost at 2 hours, so I think it's almost time to wrap up. But is the protagonist? What do you feel about the protagonist, visually, personality-wise, lore-wise, and like the fact that he's voice acted? Like, what goes into your thoughts on our protagonist here?
Will is a really interesting case, actually. I think obviously he's a very big departure for the Atlas protagonist in that he does speak
Yeah.
and he does have far more of an active role in the story than others have. Like Joker was involved and like yeah, the story revolves around him. But more so than ever, I think with Will, he's very much like he is literally an
Yeah.
avatar for the prince, and I think the story around that is really, really interesting. I think his design is brilliant. I think you and I have talked about this already, but like we prefer his design pre like end game
Transformation.
rather than
Yeah.
like yeah, because the like heterochromia
Yeah.
is absolutely is so visually
Mm-hmm.
striking. I absolutely love his visual design. I think he's brilliant.
He's
Personality
wearing the
wise,
fucking Master System box art for his
yeah, it's great. That's actually a reference because it's Sega. That's actually what they were doing.
Oh, hey, how about that? Yeah, I like the protagonist. I think that it comes around for me because I think that he strikes a weird balance between being a voiced character, because he does have a voice actor and he speaks to characters quite frequently. But he also is mostly quiet, and it's mostly everyone else talking for him. And I don't know exactly how I feel about that. I'm much more. I would rather have like a Rex from Xenoblade 2, where he's just like a loud like presence. I'm like very passionate about an RPG having like a lead character
Hmm.
that is a character. But I think Will makes sense once you play through the whole game, and I'm okay with all the creative choices because I let they make they justify it narratively. Of he's
Yeah,
not a person with a history. He is a stereotype. He is a, or not stereotype. What's the word I'm looking for? He's an archetype. Like he is a
yeah,
projection. He's not truly a character. And so I think the way that they justify that narratively, again, to this game's credit, makes me appreciate the subversion of tropes. We have
yeah,
a mostly silent chosen guy protagonist who has these abilities and everyone loves him and he's saving the world, and I should feel like, okay, I've seen this before. But the fact that it does end up making sense narratively once you've seen the game to the end, it feels very smart to me. And like, okay, they didn't just do this because it was the easy thing that they've done before. There's a reason for it. I can imagine like they start with like a simple kind of chosen guy, mostly quiet protagonist, because it is the easy thing to do, and it has been what they've done before. But as they're writing this narrative about the fact that fantasy and narrative and storytelling falls into these cliches and archetypes, and fantasy can have an impact on the world, and it's about the willpower of like overcoming your anxiety and these things. Like, what if this like basic guy protagonist is like the embodiment of that, and like
mm,
there's a narrative justification for that because he's the projection of this dreaming prince, and there's this like he is pure magic, like literally pure magic. He is
yeah,
pure willpower. That's why his name is Will. Like Will's a fucking generic white guy name, but oh, it makes sense in the narrative of the
yeah.
game, and so like it
It's
just feels
really
smart.
good. It again, it sort of speaks to like how like everything really does come back in on itself. It's like they were playing with these RPG conventions of like the silent protagonist, which Atlas have done before.
Mhm.
They've got like all of the protagonists from Persona who are like typically very silent. They have their personalities, but it's very like kind of subdued and it's up to the player. They took that and were like, hey, what if we made this into a really good story about self discovery and like this character who is a character in his own right because he doesn't have one.
Yeah.
Like, and it makes sense that he goes on this journey and he meets these people and he discovers the world because that is literally what he was destined to do
Hmm.
as both a character and as a character within the world,
Hmm.
like as the avatar of the prince. That's what he was made to do, and also as our playable
Yeah.
character, he is like kind of fulfilling that for us as well. I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I think like at in the moment I didn't appreciate it as much as I should have. I
Mm.
don't think, because I was like, oh, I kind of saw it. I kind of saw it coming
Mm.
because I was like, these characters have too close of a design for it to be for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, and
And
also
then when they revealed
because
it, I was
the game plays so much with not telling you who the prince is for so much of his fucking
yeah.
runtime. That was actually the thing that annoyed me
What is his
most.
name?
I don't think he has a name. The
No, he doesn't. Like that's what cottoned me on. I was like, oh, he doesn't have a
Yeah.
name. That is kind of
And then
interesting.
we don't learn anything about the protagonist's backstory for like most of the game, and you don't know why he was sent on this fucking quest. Like you see that opening cutscene of like the old woman that's like floating on this thing, and like the little Ujif guy, but you don't know what a Ujif is at that point. You're like, whoa, who's these characters? Why is he being sent on this journey? And they just refuse to fucking tell you about it until like the last minute, and you learn about the history of the Elda and humanity, and how in a similar way to like Xenoblade 2, this is like a post-humanity world, where all these races have like splintered off because of like a quicker evolution because of the technology that humans have developed and stuff. And then that then and like attaching that back to like the princess narrative of him, that and Will being like an extension of him, it like all comes together in a satisfying way to where even like the things that I was most like annoyed with narratively end up like, okay, they had a reason for this. It's not because they're just
Yeah,
like lazy about it or like didn't bother. It comes together in the end, which is just like that's the cherry on top of all of this. Like I love the side
Yeah.
characters. I loved exploring this world. We didn't even talk about the like political themes of the voting and all that, but that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, but even down to like the way it plays with conventions, I was expecting there to be some elements of this that I felt like, oh, I've seen this before. But it really does subvert like everything by the end, and it ends up feeling really special and like forward thinking because of that. I mean, I think this will be a landmark JRPG, especially on the narrative side, because it's a new IP that plays with the conventions. It's coming from this team. It has this history, but for me, it's because it subverts all these conventions that really it sticks with me so much.
Yeah. I think you've kind of again hit the nail on the head.
I'm building the whole goddamn house
uh,
out here. All right.
you are. You've really sort of crystallized that down into one. I think there's so many fascinating things,
Mm-hmm.
and it just feels like one of those games where it almost feels impossible that it exists now. I think with everything that's going on, and like we've had conversations about this, but a game that is so unashamed to be like this exploration of humans and like this, I like
Yep.
the culture that we share and the problems that we have. I think it's so fascinating that we have a game that is just embracing that.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it, and I mean, sort of the question looking forward is like, what comes next
The game
for
does
Metaphor
kind
as
of
a,
set up for a direct sequel, which
in a way, yeah,
would be interesting. Um, I don't know. I struggle because what has made Persona so fascinating that it's ostensibly like a new IP every time, like a new world, new characters, and
yeah,
everything. Um, and
it's like an
so
anthology.
if we get exactly, yeah, uh, if we get a metaphor blank that is a totally different world, I'd be okay with that. But I almost think that there's more value in continuing this narrative and exploring the outside world now that this world has come together and Will has settled into his role and this party knows who they are and things. That would be
Mm,
interesting. If that happens, I hope it's like a shorter game, like a smaller thing that like is a continuation of this story. But that
yeah,
doesn't
that's where
seem
a spin-off
likely.
could come in.
That doesn't seem
That's where a
particularly likely.
spin-off could come
Yeah.
in, like something like that. It would give them an excuse to sort of say, "Hey, we've got the same team. Let's just go out and explore like a small game for a tactics adventure or
Yeah.
something." Or like if they wanted to do more like direct sequel, maybe take it so the next game takes place like the generation after Will
Ah.
dies,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like a heritage kind of
Sure.
thing where Will the king has passed away, and then there's
Mhm.
like an entire other thing to do with succession, or like there is actually someone really bad
Yeah.
on the throne and stuff like that.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think I'm sure Atlus have like got some weird ideas cooking. I
Yeah.
just hope we don't see Metaphor dancing. I don't want to see Metaphor ReFantazio.
No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Yeah, but I'm excited for the future. I think Studio Zero has really set themselves apart. And
Absolutely,
now,
yeah,
guess what? We get two Persona studios. Fucking epic.
we do.
And it doesn't mean that Persona
When
6 is not going to slow down
eventually,
because P Studio still exists and they're working on it. So
yeah, Persona 6 has sort of been like the most well known secret
yeah.
of the industry for so long. I'm looking forward to seeing how that game turns out. And I
Mhm.
think, I mean, not even really a tangent, but I just hope that Metaphor being big scale means that Persona feels more comfortable going back to a smaller scale. I don't want to see
Maybe.
them.
I wouldn't put your money on that, but maybe.
I would love to see them go back to like a Persona 4. Like, this is just a small town.
Mhm.
We're just doing small town things. I want to see that again. Like Persona 5, like it's brilliant as it was. I'm worried that it's because of the story it told, it's gonna like have too much of a linger for Persona 6. I'm worried that they're just gonna in story talk about like, hey guys, do you remember the Phantom Thieves from like 7 years ago?
Yeah,
I kind of hope they don't do that, but that's a completely other
it
topic.
is. We have exhausted our topic here, which is Metaphor ReFantazio. Your game of the year, one of my games of the year. I would love to see it win game of the year. I don't know if it's going to, but it certainly has a
I
shot.
would.
Um, and thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for watching this. If you're a fan of Metaphor, leave some comments on whatever you think about all this nonsense. And we'll see you guys in another video in the future.